Welcome to Close Listening. I'm Zach Morgenstern, joined as always by silent co-host Ludwig von B. I thought I'd do a special album review for Christmas. I'm wearing my Ash Ketchum hat because, well, it's Christmassy colors and I do not have a Santa hat. And that special album is If Every Day Was Like Christmas by Elvis Presley. So this isn't a true album. I believe this is from 1994. It is a compilation album. But it is a very special album to me because Elvis, who was someone at many points I would describe in my life as my favorite musical artist, this was the very first Elvis album I listened to. I remember I decided at a young age, just because I thought it was the default thing to say, I told everyone that Elvis was my favorite singer, and my piano teacher, as a prize for doing good practicing, gave me this little dancing Elvis I could hang in the car window. And I annoyed my dad by making the little toy Elvis sing, "Santa, bring my baby back to me." Because I was like, isn't that Elvis's most famous song? And my dad was like, no, "Santa, bring my baby back to me" is not Elvis's most famous song. But because the only Elvis music I knew was this Elvis Presley Christmas album, for me, "Santa, Bring My Baby Back to Me" was Elvis's greatest hit. By the time I was around 10 years old, I really got very into being into Elvis and started seriously listening to the music. And that year I made it a tradition that even if my parents weren't putting it on the family tape player or putting it on in the car, I was personally on my Walkman going to listen to Elvis Presley If Every Day Was Like Christmas every year. And then I listened to it several Christmases in a row until I lost the tape. And for years, I just assumed it was lost, and I recently refound it somewhere in my parents' basement. And so I finally decided to research, what actually is this collection? It turns out it's basically Elvis's two Christmas albums put together. In 1957, Elvis put out an album called Elvis's Christmas Album, and in 1971, he put out another album called Elvis Sings the Wonderful World of Christmas. So this tape here is basically throwing together early rockabilly Elvis with more Vegas era, bigger production style Elvis. That said, the title of this record and the opening track is a song that falls between those two periods. I believe it was written in 1965. It's If Every Day Was Like Christmas. And this song is extra special because it was written by Elvis Presley's lifelong friend, Red West. This was someone he went to high school with and later became one of his bodyguards, and also could be turned to as a songwriter. So a very important presence on this record. If Every Day Was Like Christmas, it's a Christmas song. The lyrics aren't amazing, but it was a song that brought out an amazing emotional performance in Elvis. The production with like deep drums, maybe a timpani, makes for an intense sound. And it's just slightly unconventional chord changes, like nothing that would wow a jazz or classical person, but it's a creative song musically, and while its lyrics are corny, the emotional intensity of them is wonderful. Tracks 2 through 8 on this one then are from Elvis Presley's 1957 Christmas album, which I also have a copy of on vinyl, Elvis's Christmas album. And as I said, this is the more rockabilly stuff. So we start with what was already a country standard, Blue Christmas. What I learned from looking at the liner notes in this cassette, which are wonderfully detailed, one of the discoveries of Blue Christmas is that in addition to the backup singing group he was already working with, the Jordanaires, Elvis brought in a backup singer. She's described as a soprano, so I assume classically trained, a woman named Millie Kirkham. And it's funny, I hadn't noticed there was this soprano woman singing on the song before. I guess I just assumed it was Elvis or one of his backup singers doing some funny falsetto. But once I had that fact and realized that Millie Kirkham was one of Elvis's closest friends, she worked with him for much of his career, it adds another interesting touch to the song. You hear that interesting soprano voice just doing humming in the background. It's subtle, but she plays a key role. Track number 3 is another upbeat one. It's Here Comes Santa Claus. It mentions in here it was written by the beloved singing cowboy Gene Autry. It was considered like a children's favorite Christmas classic. The second verse is, slightly on the religious side, so that maybe makes it, less popular than the completely secular Santa Claus Is Coming to Town, but similar deal. Track number 4 is another great Christmas standard, White Christmas, but this one was apparently really controversial. Irving Berlin, the songwriter, was outraged that Elvis was doing this one, and he called various radio stations. But the thing is, if you listen to it, I don't think it really sounds any different than the Bing Crosby version of White Christmas. There was this sense that rock and roll was this new scandalous, raunchy music. And I guess in some live performances where you saw Elvis shaking his hips or whatever, there was some truth to that. But I mean, this goes to show the silliness of the moral panic. You would never listen to this version of White Christmas and think it was scandalous. And on top of that, as the liner notes note, Elvis's version was basically just a redo of the version by Clyde McPhatter and the Drifters. So they had already done the rock and roll version. Irving Berlin had just not heard of that one. Track 5 is my personal favorite, Santa Bring My Baby Back to Me. Rock and roll mixed with Christmas perfectly. I wonder if this is like the first, use Santa to really sing a standard rock love song. Like this is the prototype for All I Want for Christmas Is You, or whether there are even earlier songs that do the same thing. Probably, but I'd like to think this one sort of started the tradition. Track number 6 is the sort of slower standard I'll Be Home for Christmas. So I had mixed feelings about this tape as a kid, honestly, because I just loved the first 5 tracks so much I had to listen to it. But afterwards, it goes into the slower, mellower stuff as well as the more religious stuff. So I don't know. I find I'll Be Home for Christmas, which you may know is being sung later by Michael Bublé, to be a bit dreary. But there is a kind of funny Elvis-y pronunciation of mistletoe. Another thing about these albums is they would not have been recorded at Christmas time. These songs were recorded in September of 1957 in order to make sure they were all ready for Christmas. And they tried to get the mood going in the studio. They decorated it with a tree and presents. So, it's hard to know which of these songs Elvis was actually enthusiastic for and which of these were just a sort of commercial plan by the studio. And then, as I said, we now get into religious songs. Track 7 is a hymn called O Little Town of Bethlehem. Though the one thing I found interesting is apparently when this song was written, I think by some church figure in the early 20th century, it was inspired by him actually visiting Bethlehem. I can appreciate it. It's not just about, sacred place where Jesus was born. It's actually an ode to this little town. Track number 8 is called Santa Claus is Back in Town. This is by another iconic duo of songwriters who worked a lot with Elvis, Lieber and Stoller. And it's basically just singing a Christmas song to a standard bluesy beat. And Elvis's voice is nice and raunchy and great for the blues. Pretty much the rest of the album then covers the material from his 1971 Christmas release. So the production starts to get a bit thicker. It's more reminiscent of Why Can't Every Day Be Like Christmas than like the rockabilly stuff is. So it won't seem like Christmas Without You just has that nice, intense end of the chorus is, I'll see you tonight in my dreams. Then we get the even more intense, if I get home on Christmas Day. We get another song written by Elvis's friend, Red West, Holly Leaves and Christmas Tree. And then we get Merry Christmas Baby. And it's funny, when I used to listen to this album as a kid, I assumed that they just wrote so much blues content that this is just part 2 of the first blues song. But in fact, all it is that all blues songs kind of sound the same. So Merry Christmas Baby was a blues song written by 2 guys named Johnny Moore and Lou Baxter back in the 40s that Elvis then recorded on the 70s Christmas album, whereas Santa Claus is Back in Town was written for Elvis in the 50s. So they're technically completely different songs, even though on this collection, it kind of sounds like one is a sequel to the other. The second half of the tape starts with Elvis's version of Silver Bells. This is actually the very first Elvis song I remember hearing. And it's funny that when I was a little kid and I imagined Elvis, I didn't picture this cool young guy with slick back hair. I pictured like a sophisticated older man. And I guess it's because of the slow, warm beauty of Silver Bells. Then we get I'll Be Home on Christmas Day. This is kind of like the one country track on here with some nice vulnerable vocals. It changes up the feel a little. We get another intense song, The Wonderful World of Christmas. Almost gets Phil Spector-y in its use of bells on the bridge. Then we get On the Snowy Christmas Night, another mellow one with some vaguely religious themes. Winter Wonderland, that's a classic. I imagine, everyone has heard, Pretending the Snowman is a Preacher, a lyric I never understood as a kid. I thought Parson Brown was just some guy. But anyway, this is a great version of Winter Wonderland just because of the guitar riff on it. Then we get Oh Come All Ye Faithful. Of all the religious songs, this one sounds most like it's just a hymn being sung in a church, except for, when they drop the drums towards the end, give it more of a produced rock feel. And then we get The First Noel. I don't know why they use the French or Latin word for Christmas on this one, other than I learned in the liner notes, apparently this is the oldest song on the album dating back to the 18th century. sounds a bit Handel-ish to me, and I can appreciate that more now that I know that. And then finally, the album ends with Silent Night, which was actually back on the original 1957 Christmas album. So yeah, it was fun to revisit this old favorite of mine and appreciate the various stories behind these tracks. Again, it's hard to know when a singer puts out a Christmas album, whether they're just doing it for commercial reasons or they really care about the individual tracks. It's hard not to imagine there was not at least some heartfelt connection to the Red West songs here and some of the rockabilly stuff. Here Comes Santa Claus, Santa Bring My Baby Back to Me, Blue Christmas, certainly some catchy materials. I'm Zach Morgenstern. This is Ludwig von B. See you next time.